Is the iPhone 13 mini really worth buying in 2021? Well, today we will find out because we're going to compare it to all of these different iPhones, including the lower priced iPhone SE, last year's 12 and 12 mini, and the 13 and 13 Pro. And with that, I have to say that this year Apple has a few secrets for the mini that you guys have to know to make a really good decision. With that, we are going to compare the performance. Did Apple slow down this phone? We're going to compare the speakers, which almost nobody does, and even the speeds of 5G to see if Apple fixed a major problem from before, and also talk about battery life, screen sizes, and more. Let's get prices out of the way along with what you absolutely shouldn't buy. At the base, we have $400 for the SE, and then at $600, we do have the 12 mini, which I would not buy. You guys will see here in a little bit as we do this comparison of why I wouldn't buy that. And then for $700, you can either buy a 13 mini or an iPhone 12. I'll be talking about that. And then of course for $800, you can go for the 13, and then a big jump of $1,000 and $1,100 for these larger phones. Now, most of this comparison, if you're thinking about buying one of these, you're gonna be looking at these ones right here at the lower end price. Now, as far as design differences, all of these have the same new boxy design other than the iPhone SE. Let's go ahead and pull these in here. Now, I also have to point out that all these less expensive phones, they're all product red, and you guys can see the color difference between them. Last year, I really didn't like the salmon colored product red. The SE looked better, but this year's 13 mini looks gorgeous. I love that dark, deep red color. Now, as far as those design differences between these two phones, you guys can see that we have these flat sides on the 13 mini and the rest of the 12 and 13 lineup compared to the SE, which has the older iPhone 8, 7, and 6 design with the rounded edges. So personally, I really prefer the look and feel of the new 12s and 13s. You have this nice flat sides that give you a lot of grip compared to the rounded sides, and you guys can also see the size difference between these two phones. Even though the SE has a smaller screen, overall it is larger, and with that, it is actually wider in your hand as well. So if you're somebody that's coming from an older iPhone that uses this design with this size, the 13 mini is actually gonna be smaller and narrower for you, which does help as far as comfort. And on the fronts, we have another major difference. As you guys can see, without that home button and that little forehead, we have a much larger display. We have 5.4 inches compared to 4.7. Now, you're probably familiar with Touch ID. iPhones have had them for years. Of course, that is gone. But instead, we do have Face ID, which for the most part is a lot more convenient. You can automatically log you into apps without even having to move your finger down there to authenticate. Now, as far as displays, I went ahead and adjusted that top camera, and you guys can see that the 13 mini has another major advantage, and that is brightness. It can now reach 800 nits of brightness compared to 625 on the 12s and the SE, and that really helps when you're outside in bright lighting or just in bright environments. Now, as far as watching HDR video, all of the iPhone 12s and 13s are the same at 1200 nits, but of course the SE cannot pull that off. So let's see how it compares. You guys can see there is a massive difference, not only in brightness, where the iPhone 13's 1200 nits is popping like crazy, but also contrast. Because this is an OLED display like the rest of the 12s and the 13s, you have those deep, rich darks instead of the LCD panel, which for its time was actually the best. Now it just cannot compare with the bright and nice and contrasty HDR OLED display that's in the iPhone 13. Now with that, what I'm really curious about is how do the speakers compare on the 13 mini compared to the 13, which is a larger size, costs $100 more, and of course the older generation phones like the SE, which has the same speakers as the iPhone 8, and those are slightly better than the 7 and the 6. So let's go ahead and compare them. All right, wow, that was a pretty big difference between them. You guys let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. I'll start out with the SE, which is the same as the 8 and better than the 7 and 6 because it has an earpiece speaker, and the difference is dramatic. Louder, better bass, better mids, and a huge thing is if you like to watch videos, with the SE and the older phones, you're not really having a balanced sound between the bottom speaker and the left-hand side one, or the earpiece speaker. Most of the sound comes from the bottom, whereas with the SE, it is really balanced because Apple has upgraded the earpiece speaker with this new model. It sounds a lot better. Now, with that said, other than having a little bit louder of an earpiece speaker, one very interesting thing is that Apple didn't really upgrade the speakers compared to the 12 mini. It sounds almost the same other than slightly louder on the left-hand side, where they actually did make a really big upgrade with the iPhone 13, sounding louder, better in every way compared to the 12. So don't expect much better sound if you already have a 12 mini and you want to upgrade to the 13 mini, but from an older phone, the difference is really dramatic. With that said, if you're trying to decide between a 13 mini or a 13 and you care about sound quality, the 13 is definitely much better. Better bass, more richer mids, the highs are a little bit more clear, and it's a lot louder as well. And now for what I'm very interested in, if Apple limited the iPhone 13 mini compared to the regular 13 and how that compares to the 12s. Now right here we have Geekbench 5 open, and starting out with the SE, this thing has the A13 Bionic with 3 gigs of RAM compared to the 12s, which have the A14 Bionic with 4 gigs, and of course the 13s with that new A15, also 4 gigs of RAM. Now as far as RAM, I think 4 gigabytes should be the standard. I think 3 is still a little bit small, unless all you do is maybe take some pictures every once in a while and maybe make phone calls. But with that said, let's go ahead and start our CPU benchmark. All right, we have a result, and the 13 mini is quite a bit faster than the SE. In the multi-core, it's a 50% faster, and in single core, about 30% faster. And along with that extra gig of RAM, this thing is gonna be much quicker and last you many more years than if you spend the money and buy the SE. Now, compared to the 12 mini and the 12, the 13 mini is 15% faster in multi-core and about 9% faster in single core, which isn't really that big of a difference, so I really wouldn't care about performance. Now, as you guys see, the 13 and 13 mini, the performance is basically the same, very small differences, even smaller than last year, so you're not really trading off any performance if you're going with the smaller phone. And what's very interesting is that if you compare it to this phone, the 13 Pro with 6 gigs of RAM, the results are still very similar. We have less of a difference this year than we did last year with the 12 compared to the 12 Pro. So as far as performance, this is the smallest kind of loss you get by going with the smaller phone. And the next two categories that I'm gonna cover are extremely important. One of them that you're probably suspecting, the other one that you're not. Let's start off with that one. With the iPhone 12 mini, not only did people complain about the battery life, but I actually found that the reception was much worse than the iPhone 12, and that caused me not to be able to use it even though I really liked it. As you guys could see, in this download test with 5G, I got 124 megabit per second download compared to 197. That's close to half the speed. Not only that, in certain parts of the city, I literally did not get a signal with the iPhone 12 mini, but I did with the regular 12 and the 12 Pros. So that was a deal breaker for me. So what happens with the 13 mini? Is it still limited with suckier reception? Well, I actually did a speed test, and as you guys can see, we got the same 201, actually slightly faster than the 12, and an upload speed of actually 34, whereas the old mini was much slower. And then comparing that to the iPhone 13, we got 203 here and a slower download just for that test. So yes, Apple did fix the modem and the antenna problem with the 13 mini compared to the 12. Now I'll let you guys know why that is in a second, but if we open up the SE, if you're thinking about upgrading from an older iPhone, than SE, the 8 or the 7, you guys can see that without the 5G, with the LTE, we get a download speed of 57 and that's not even super fast 5G. That's just your normal slower 5G. So you definitely are gonna get better reception with the Mini and much faster speeds. It's pretty much 4 times faster. And now let's talk about battery life and if the 13 Mini has enough battery life for most people. Now Apple said that it got an extra hour and a half of battery life compared to the 12 Mini, and that battery life is actually the reason why most people did not buy the 12 Mini. This thing didn't last very long, but how's that compared to the other phones? Well, Apple gave us some different quotes, but Mr. Who's the Boss actually did an insane battery test. He had to change his plans for the evening because of how long it took, and he gave us some really great answers, and we have some big improvements. Now, the SE lasted just about 3.5 hours, which is terrible. That is terrible battery life. He didn't test the 12, but I've tested it before, and in previous tests, it's about 5 hours of battery life, where the 13 Mini gets 6.5 hours of battery life. Now, what is very interesting is that the 13 Mini now beats out the iPhone 12, which most people were happy with. That thing got a little bit less than 6 hours of screen on time. So if you're somebody that didn't buy a 12 Mini because of battery life, you went with the 12, but you would like a smaller phone, the 13 Mini is now better, and 6.5 hours is great for most people. Now, of course, if you're trying to compare it to the iPhone 13, that got about 7 hours and 45 minutes. So Apple quoted about an hour more than the 13 Mini. In reality, it's actually a little bit better than that, but overall battery life has been fixed, and that is why we see nice speed improvements here in the 5G speeds. I think Apple had to slow down the 12 Mini because of the poor battery life, slow down the reception, use less wattage, and that gave you worse reception and worse speeds, where now with the 13 Mini, Apple doesn't have to do that. Now, along with that, we should also talk about charging. Of course, all of the 12s and 13s support Magsafe, so you can attach like this, you can charge. With that, you can also use different accessories. For example, we have wallets. And the cool thing about wallets is that with the 12 Mini or the 13 Mini, they fit perfectly on the phone itself. So I've done tests where it really doesn't fall off with the Mini phones compared to the 13 or the 12, whereas there's a lot more room for this to slide around. So that is definitely a benefit. And the same thing goes for Apple's little charging pack that they came out with, Magsafe. That fits perfectly on those phones as well. And of course, with the iPhone SE, we do not have that capability for Magsafe. Same thing with older iPhones, and I will say Magsafe has been a game changer. I love attaching my phone to my little car mount, being able to charge while I'm using GPS and having that convenience charging at home. Using different accessories. Magsafe is awesome, and I think it's well worth getting a newer phone to have that capability. And the last secret that I want to cover has to do with charging. Now, unfortunately, if you're using Magsafe, Apple is still limiting that charging to 12 watts compared to 15 watts with the regular 13s, the 12s, the Pro models. So you are still limited, and because it has that larger battery compared to last year's 12 Mini, it will take even longer to charge. But with that said, if you are using wire charging, what a lot of people didn't know is that the 12 Mini was also fairly limited. In my test, it got about 12 or so watts instead of the full 20 watts from those newer adapters. But with the 13 Mini, it was running at about 16.5 watts. It actually peaked at over 17, maybe 17.5 watts of charging. So if you want fast charging, definitely use a cable, and you will get faster speeds than even the 12 Mini when you're charging with the cable. Now, with that said, you actually don't need to have a 20 watt adapter. An 18 watt older one will work just fine to get the maximum performance. So don't think you have to go buy a new one if you have an older one. Now, of course, we do recommend going with an Anchor charger. They're currently not yet a sponsor with us, but this guy right here is, I think, 11 or 12 bucks. It also has folding prongs, which are very nice, and Apple's one one doesn't offer that. So I'll go ahead and leave a link to that down in the video description below. And before I give my final verdict, we have to cover the cameras. Just like last year, the 13 mini has the same exact cameras as the 13, which is an amazing thing. But this year, of course, the 13s and the 13 mini have the same cameras from the 12 Pro Max. So we have that sensor stabilization, we have the ultra wide that's also been improved. So that is awesome. And when we compare it to the 12 mini, you guys can see just how much larger those camera lenses are. Now, of course, the 13s don't have the 3x telephoto that comes with the 13 Pro, but other than that, if you guys want to see how the cameras compare to, say, the iPhone 12s or the 12 Pro Max, you guys can actually go and check out my camera comparison that's very detailed. And if you're wondering, is it really worth the Pro camera to get that extra telephoto and the other updates such as the larger sensor, I actually have a video that came out, I think that was yesterday posted. You guys can check that out and see if that telephoto really makes a difference for you, along with the upgraded ultra wide lens. Now those videos are available, but let's see how much better is the 13 mini's camera compared to the single camera that is on the iPhone SE. Here's a regular shot in normal lighting, and you guys can see how much more detail we have with the new mini. And here's a shot with night mode, which of course the SE does not have. It looks so much better having that capability. And then with the front-facing camera, we also have night mode. It makes low light shots look much better and much more detailed. And then if you're somebody that wants to zoom without a telephoto, here is how the zoom shot looks with Apple's upscaling. And then of course we have the ultra wide lens, which is very helpful in a lot of different scenarios, gives you really nice angles. And then a regular selfie shot. This has actually blur from the portrait mode that you can get. And the same thing goes with portraits using that standard lens. That capability makes your photos look a lot more professional. You can blur out backgrounds. So if you're somebody that's considering these phones, I would definitely say if you care about camera quality at all, you have to go with the 13 mini. So what is my final verdict on the iPhone 13 mini? Is it worth upgrading to from an older iPhone, and even the iPhone 12 mini? And is it worth buying instead of a much cheaper iPhone SE? And should you spend more money potentially and get the 13, or the same amount of money and get the 12? Those are a lot of answers to give you guys, but I'll straight up say yes, it is worth it. If you wanted a smaller phone last year but you didn't go for it, buy it now. If you cared about the battery life and it wasn't good enough, now it is. It even beats out the 12. And the other features such as the better processor, brighter display, and if you like having a smaller phone, I would buy it instead of the iPhone 12. Now with that said, if you have older phones and you kind of like that smaller size, I would still say go for it. There's so many more improvements for the extra money. I would definitely not get the 12 mini for $100 less, since that is still for sale. You get so many improvements, especially the antennas and that reception, that matters a lot, and much better battery life as well, and then the cameras. And then to compare to the 13, well, if you're somebody that watches a lot of videos, you listen to music with the built-in speakers, or you play games, having that larger screen with the better speakers is nice. But outside of that, unless you know you need killer battery life, the 13 mini still delivers. It has very little downsides, and you save $100 and have a much more smaller compact phone that just fits so nicely in the hand. And then that mini size with the wallet or the Magsafe power pack, that works out really well. So this year I actually am very happy with the 13 mini. And the last secret actually is that right now, based on all the info we have, Apple is not going to be making another mini phone. So if you wanted to upgrade from an older iPhone or from the 12 mini, or you just want a small phone, it is worth buying it this year with the 13 mini, with that new processor, the better cameras, because going into the future, it looks like Apple is going to have a new version of the SE, a cheaper one, that is not going to be matching up to their flagship phones. It's going to be lower processor, worse cameras, so there will be a lot of other drawbacks in order to get that smaller size compared to right now. If you're buying a 13 mini, it is most of what the 13 offers for a lower price, same performance, RAM, cameras. It is a really nice phone if you like that smaller size. So there you guys go. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Of course, you guys could pick up one of those chargers for your phones with the link. That's a great price. And click that subscribe button above if you guys want to help us reach 1 million subscribers and see more videos. Check out one of those great camera comparisons right over there. This has been Max, and I will see you in the next video.